Good morning. We'll begin our session in just a moment or two. It might be nice if we moved a little bit closer. They gave us a lovely big room for Dr. Ryff, but it might be nice if we were all gathered towards the front. Thank you. So I am Afton Hassett. I'm from the University of Michigan, Department of Anesthesiology. It is my distinct honor to introduce to you the 2015 Contributions in Positive Health Award winner, Dr. Carol Ryff. But first, I'd like to encourage you to become involved in the Division of Positive Health. This is something that we've had ongoing for about 6 years, but now is on the precipice of becoming an official division. Tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., yes, 7 a.m., we will be having our business meeting. At that meeting, we will be ratifying our overview and our vision for the department. We will also, the division, we'll also be talking to interested members and seeing how we can get many of you engaged in the division as well as in leadership positions. So please do be there. If you aren't able to attend the business meeting, you also can indicate your interest in the division on the IPA website in the membership section. And then there will also be an informal special interest group luncheon following this talk. And so we can talk to you more about that informally, but that's just more of a mixer. But with that said, today's award recipient follows 3 remarkable predecessors, wonderful scientists who have also won the Contributions in Positive Health Award. In 2009, Dr. Sheldon Cohen received the award. 2011, Dr. Andrew Steptoe. 2013, Dr. Annette Stanton, and now 2015, we have Dr. Carol Ryff. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Carol Ryff is the director of the Institute of Aging and Hilldale Professor of Psychology at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Her research centers on the study of psychological well-being in an area in which she has developed multidimensional assessment scales that have been translated into more than 30 different languages and are used in research across diverse scientific fields. More than 500 publications have been generated from her scales of well-being. Investigations by Dr. Ryff and colleagues have addressed how psychological well-being varies by age, gender, socioeconomic status, ethnic and minority status, and cultural context, as well as by experiences, challenges, transitions that individuals confront as they age. Whether psychological well-being is protective of good physical health is also a major interest area of hers, with ongoing longitudinal investigations linking positive psychosocial factors to a wide array of biomarkers, including endocrine, immune, and cardiovascular markers, as well as neural circuitry as an fMRI. Dr. Ryff has generated over 200 publications in the areas described above, and she currently directs MIDAS, which is the Midlife in the U.S. longitudinal study, which is based on a large national sample of Americans, including twins. Funded by the National Institute of Aging, MIDAS has become a major forum for studying health and aging as an integrated biopsychosocial process. She is also the principal investigator of MIDJA, which is a midlife in Japan study, a parallel to MIDAS investigation for which she received an NIH, National Institutes of Health, Merit Award, one of the highest honors. We are so happy to have her here with us today to present her talk, Past, Present, and Future Perspectives of Eudaimonic Well-Being. Dr. Ryff.
Look at that.
May I give this to you?
Wow.
She's going to take a picture
Oh,
of us.
geez, that's really cool. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. All right.
Yeah,
I'll take this
you
a
put it okay. Brandon, back there behind the curtain, put up the other title, could you? Slide 66. Yeah. So this was my alternative title. That I thought, might be more fun. Yes, I am a big spokesperson for eudaimonia, but believe me, I get my share of pleasure, and I appreciate its importance in life. Okay, so go back to the other beginning. I'm going to speak about the past, present, and future in research on eudaimonic well-being, but I'm going to take inspiration from William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury, and I'm going to tell things out of order. So I'm going to start with the present rather than the past, and I'm going to start with noting what has been built up around this model of psychological well-being that I developed over 25 years ago. Much to my amazement, there have now been over 500 publications using this model of well-being and the measures that are included with it. And this is the cover page of a review article I published last year in 2014, looking at these many publications. I was just curious, what are people doing with these measures of eudaimonic well-being? And in the review, I summarized that they're being used to investigate lots of different questions, not the least of which is, does this model of psychological well-being, eudaimonic well-being, does it have decent psychometric properties? How do these various aspects of well-being change as people move across the adult life course and confront some of the challenges that accompany aging? There's a lot of work that has linked these various aspects of well-being to other individual difference variables, such as personality traits and sense of control. I'm very happy to see that many people have used these measures of eudaimonic well-being to try to build bridges to both family life and to people's experiences in work and in their communities. And as you will see with what I emphasize, I have been particularly interested in building bridges between this model of eudaimonic well-being and health, including looking at biomarkers and neuroscience. And then the last part of this review article summarizes some of the ongoing efforts in intervention and clinical and educational programs intending to promote eudaimonic well-being. So when I look at this production of studies built around this model of well-being, I'm personally very interested. Like, why has this happened? Why has so much grown up around this model of well-being? And this is how I reflect about it in the article, that I think it stems from the fact that these phenomenological indicators, I'm very interested in subjective experience, that they capture core aspects of what it means to be human. That is to strive, to be proactive, to make meaning out of our experiences, and as articulated by Aristotle over 2,000 years, to pursue the highest good that is within us. So one of, for me, the driving motivations behind this model of eudaimonic well-being is that I believe it's reaching toward ideals in human functioning. So now we're going to go back to the beginning. Back to the beginning when I, as a newly minted assistant professor, was reading a lot of existential and humanistic and developmental and clinical psychology. This was well before anybody was talking positive psychology. I was actually toiling in the wilderness, I think, at that point in time, and got messages that it was the wilderness. So, for example, the first time I contacted the National Institute of Mental Health to see about possibly getting funding for this kind of research, the response was, oh, we don't fund that sort of thing. To which I wanted to say, well, then why do you call yourself the National Institute of Mental Health? You're actually the National Institute of Mental Illness. But what I want to draw attention to here, many of you who've listened to me speak in other contexts have seen this pinwheel. And usually I focus on the 6 yellow pieces of the pie in the middle, and we'll get to those. But here I want to focus on what's in blue around these 6 components of well-being. because that is the literature that I spent a lot of time reading and thinking about. It came from many different subfields of psychology, as I've mentioned before, and all of these different conceptualizers, rightists, it's maybe going a little far to call them theorists. I don't really know when you kind of reach a divide where you can legitimately be called a theorist. But all of these people were really striving to articulate the upside of the human experience. And so as a young researcher, my challenge was, well, do I want to go with one of these perspectives? And I didn't really think any single one was that compelling. What I thought was interesting is that they were all kind of reaching toward some sort of formulation of positive human characteristics. And so I decided to go with what are the points of convergence. I thought, if I'm going to knock myself out trying to develop some empirical assessment tools to measure these things, I would like to feel that I am going after something that multiple people have articulated in somewhat different ways. And so that's how the 6 components in the middle got conceptualized. And the hand there, the hand is symbolic of reaching for something new. But then there's this other task. It's called getting down to business in operationalizing constructs, like those 6 constructs that sat in the middle of that pie. And that's not an easy task. One does not just say, I'm going to study something positive, throw together a few items, and consider the task done. It's a long, tedious, belabored journey. And it starts with definitions. It starts with carefully formulated definitions. And I used as a guide in trying to build this model work by Douglas Jackson, who had developed the personality research form and the Jackson personality inventory. His measures were actually designed to operationalize Henry Murray's needs in Murray's needs theory. But what I learned from him is, how do you actually go after constructs and try to come up with some empirical tools that bear some close resemblance to what the construct is actually about. So there I was, sitting in my dumpy little office in the Brogdon Psychology building at the University of Wisconsin with 3 or 4 undergraduates, and we started writing items based on those definitions, okay? And writing items is not easy. It's a challenging task because you have to be able to write them so that a person of any age or gender or political background, whatever, could read the item and answer it. Whether you're employed or unemployed, it's really important that you write items both for the downside, and that is the low score on the construct, as well as the upside, that is the high score. And then after you've generated all of these items, and we generated a lot of items, then you subject them to all kinds of item analysis, the steps of which I'm not going to detail here. They're in the published findings. But what I want to draw attention to here, before getting into some imagery that's more fun than reading items, is that the operationalization of the upside of human experience is no less challenging than it is to come up with credible measures of depression or anxiety or other forms of symptomatology. It needs a lot of care and attention. Okay, so one year on my birthday, Dov Shmotkin, who's a dear friend at the University of Tel Aviv in Israel, sent me some pictures for the 6 dimensions of well-being. And so I show these routinely now because I think they give you a better flavor of what these 6 components are. So autonomy is about marching to your own drummer. Environmental mastery is about feeling that you can manage your external world and actually create an environment that suits your needs and capacities. Personal growth is about making the most of your talents and capacities at every stage in the life course. Positive relations with others is the most universally endorsed aspect of what it means to be functioning well as a human being. It's about taking care of your social ties. And this was my favorite of all the images that Dove sent me. This is to capture some sort of symbolic imagery behind finding meaning and direction, purpose in life. And for this, he chose Raphael's painting of the School of Athens. And this is a painting you can see if you visit Rome, and lots of these people are identified here. And I would just say in the last few weeks, I just finished reading Jules Evans' book called Philosophy for Life. Fabulous, fabulous little book in which he takes you into the lives of many of these early Greek philosophers and talks about what does that mean for how we might function better in daily life today. And I would just say the guy that's sort of flopped in the middle of the group is Diogenes, and this is a big plug for Jules Evans' book. You got to read about Diogenes. He was an original. Okay, and then the last aspect of well-being is self-acceptance, and it's really an importantly different construct from things like self-esteem, positive self-regard, because self-acceptance, drawing on the Jungian idea of the shadow, the seamy underside that exists in all of us, self-acceptance is actually about recognizing your strengths and your weaknesses and knowing how to function effectively so that your weaknesses are not overwhelming the show. Okay, I'm using Aristotle's word, so certainly I need to underscore the ancient philosophical roots. So it is in the Nicomachean Ethics that one reads about eudaimonia, which Aristotle believed was the highest of all human goods, and then he worked very hard to try to define what eudaimonia is. For him, it is activity of the soul in accord with virtue, and then he kept digging into additional layers in this journey, asking, well, then what is the highest virtue? And for Aristotle, the highest virtue is achieving the best that is within us. And I think that really is the essence of, let me call it, the most beautiful underpinnings of eudaimonia. And it was, for sure, at the time, an alternative to other philosophical perspectives, such as hedonia, which were more about the pursuit of pleasure and satisfying appetites. I would be remiss if I didn't put up this picture of Viktor Frankl and man's search for meaning. Eudaimonia, I think, is very much about meaning, and for me, eudaimonia, as I will say later in the talk, I think it actually comes from encounters with challenge and adversity and finding meaning in adversity, and we have no better example of how to do that than in this book by Viktor Frankl. So I'm moving along in incremental steps in trying to formulate this approach. There was first the publication in 1989 where the 6 components of well-being and the conceptual foundation were put forth in the assessment tools. Then with Corey Keyes in 1995, we actually had our hands on the first national data set. It wasn't MIDAS, it was a pilot study prior to MIDAS, but it was a national sample in which we tested the overall structure of the model of well-being. And then with Corey and Dov Schmatkin in 2002, we used baseline data from MIDAS to actually look at this juxtaposition empirically between hedonia and eudaimonia. And then it took me a while, but in 2008, I ended up putting together this article that focused on really what Aristotle was trying to say to us. And I felt it was important to go back and try to recapture some of what he was talking about. So I just want to draw attention here to this publication in 2002 that was the first examination of an empirical contrast between hedonia and eudaimonia using multiple indicators of each. And that was really important because many people, especially people who work in big population level studies where they say, well, why do we need 6 different measures of well-being? Can't you guys figure out what it is? Why can't you distill it down to something that's more parsimonious? And it actually is very important to do this kind of measurement work to show, of course, these things are related constructs because they're all about well-being, but there's also important evidence that they are distinct. And that evidence even grows when you begin to look at them as antecedents or outcome variables. But in any case, this article underscored that they have different correlates and predictors, and basically said, we need both of them. We need both of these approaches to well-being. And that got me into the Midas study. And the Midas study is where I've been spending huge amounts of my time and energy over the last couple decades. It is a big national study of Americans, begun in 1995 with over 7,000 individuals aged 25 to 74. As you can see up in the corner of this brochure that's on our website, the point of Midas is to advance knowledge of factors that promote positive health and resilience. We have grown the study over time. We now have over 12,000 people in the study, some of whom have been studied for 20 years. It's longitudinal, and it's become a great resource for the entire scientific community. This brochure is on the website. I don't have time to go into the details, but one thing I want to underscore is that even though I'm here talking about well-being and some of its links to various aspects of health, the Midas study covers all kinds of other territory. And we collect the data via a project design. There's a survey project, there are questionnaires, there's a daily assessment done over a period of 7 days. There's a comprehensive cognitive assessment. Then we bring in a subsample of respondents to 3 clinics around the country for biomarker assessments. And at the University of Wisconsin, under the direction of Richie Davidson, we also are doing neuroscience assessments. The goal of Midas, and this is a big passion of mine, next to my passion for promoting eudaimonic well-being is my passion for promoting integrative science. And why do I care about that so much? It seems to me that all of the important questions that we study are questions that require multiple kinds of expertise, which is to say what each of us know as individuals is not enough. We need to become better and more skilled at putting what we know together with what other people know. And so this is a little Venn diagram we created for one of the recent grant proposals to say Midas is doing a lot of integration. And we're also touting the fact that Midas, it's a public use data set. Nearly 40% of the publications to date are not from the scientific investigators, but from people actually all over the world. So we have over 600 publications so far. If you go to the Midas website and you click on for researchers and then you click on publications, this will come up. And this will, you can then click on each of these topics to basically go into examples of the studies in each of these areas. And I just want to draw attention to the fact that we have over 130 publications on psychological well-being. Some using my measures, some using positive and negative affect, life satisfaction, some using optimism, many different measures of well-being. This is the website for Midas. I really want to underscore this is a place anyone can access. The data are well documented. They're very user-friendly. I think that's why they get such high usage. You don't need permission. Anybody can use these data. So please let me encourage you to use them. So what have we learned in this journey? I'm coming now back to talk more about eudaimonic well-being, and in going through what we have learned, I do want to make the statement that I'm aware that there are other approaches and measures to eudaimonic well-being. I am not, because I am restricting my comments just to the tools that I developed. I am not indirectly saying I think these are the best or the only tools. What I am saying is, because I spent a lot of time developing these tools, I'm more than a little interested in what have we learned using them. So one thing I'm going to focus on is that we have learned that the process of aging across the life course actually influences people's well-being. And this is where we can see the use of well-being as an outcome of the experiences people experience with aging. And what we have seen is that there's evidence in multiple studies of some vulnerabilities that occur in later life. And these were first evident in cross-sectional findings from the baseline Midas study, where you can see these plummeting by age scores on the two most existential humanistic aspects of well-being, namely purpose in life and personal growth. And you see the same downward profiles for purpose in life and personal growth for men. And then we move to the longitudinal data. And in the longitudinal data, this graph basically divides the sample up into 5 age groups at our first follow-up, 9 to 10 years later. And within each of those age groups, we plot the average score at time 1 and then at time 2, so that you can see that the oldest members of the sample are in fact declining the most on purpose in life. And I note this publication by Springer, Pudrowska, and Hauser below the figure, because they have done a nice publication that integrates data from 2 national longitudinal data sets plus the Wisconsin longitudinal study to basically underscore these declines in purpose in life are real, as are the declines in personal growth. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this question, but it's obviously a very important question. Why do we see, on average, that older people in contemporary society, and we've also seen this in Canada, why do we see these declines in purpose and growth? The sociologists would say it's probably tied up with what they call the structural lag problem, which is to say that people are living longer and our social institutions have not kept up with the added years of life that people are experiencing. That would account for why they have perhaps fewer opportunities to feel purposeful or continuing to grow. But what I've drawn attention to, and what the rest of the slides in this sequence will highlight, is there's a lot of variability around those means. And so I'm really interested in these older people who actually hang on to high levels of purpose and growth. And what are the activities, or what are the, how do we explain that? And I just note one publication here by Emily Greenfield, who used the Midas data to basically show that volunteering in later life protects against such decline. And this is a new direction that has grown up around the single dimension purpose in life. And it was completely unanticipated by me in 1989 when I first published these measures. I wasn't even thinking about health at that point. But what has grown up around this particular scale, purpose in life, is amazing. I'm going to quickly click through findings that underscore these advances, but we now know that purpose in life predicts how long people live. It predicts their risk for various diseases. It predicts their preventive healthcare practices. And so this is where we switch to using an aspect of eudaimonic well-being as an antecedent. So here's a publication from Midas showing that purpose in life buffers against mortality across adulthood. An earlier publication from the Rush Memory and Aging Project, which is based on a 6-year community epidemiology study, also showed that purpose in life predicts longer lives. The same study, the Rush Memory and Aging Project, because it is a study of memory and cognition, it also produced these findings showing that purpose in life protects against Alzheimer's disease and mild cognitive impairment. And amazingly, because they get people in the Rush Memory and Aging Project to donate their brains after they die, they are able to do postmortem analyses. And their postmortem analyses actually have shown that purpose in life modifies the association between Alzheimer's disease pathology in the brain. That is, they go into the brain after death and measure plaques and tangles and other indicators of organic pathology in the brain. And then they put that together with how was this person functioning cognitively while they were still alive. And what they show is that what differentiates, a strong differentiator in maintenance of cognitive abilities in the face of organic pathology is having high purpose in life. Of course, that's a finding that needs to be explained with other neuroscience investigations, but I think it's an incredible finding. Eric Kim, who was a hell of a go-getter as a graduate student at the University of Michigan. He recently finished his PhD, but he generated 3 publications as a graduate student from the Health and Retirement Study, which is another major national study of aging in the US. And these studies showed that purpose in life reduces risk of myocardial infarction, even among adults with coronary heart disease. Purpose in life reduces risk of stroke, and purpose in life predicts greater use of preventive health behaviors. And then more recently, we see in the work of Barbara Fredrickson and Steve Cole, linkage of eudaimonic well-being to gene expression, in particular, reduced expression of CTRA genes, that stands for Conserved Transcriptional Response to Adversity. These are genes involved in inflammatory processes and antibody processes. And eudaimonia is emerging as a very strong predictor of reduced CTRA expression, notably a stronger predictor than hedonic measures. But actually, it amazes me. I put this slide up for younger people to say, persist. If you're studying something that you think is important, you will always have critics. The naysayers are always out there. They're always going to be beating you up. So when I'm reviewing some of these recent papers, I'm always boggled that there's, hopefully never more than one reviewer, but usually there's one reviewer who's just like, oh, this stuff is just a joke. Purpose in life is really flaky. It's not a serious argument. I mean, eventually, such individuals will have to eat their words. Okay, so more recent work focuses more on well-being as a moderator. What I'm trying to underscore here is you can use these measures of well-being in many different ways. You can use them as predictors. You can use them as outcomes. I'm especially interested in using them as moderators. Are they protective influences in the face of challenge? And I note here a publication from the Midas studies where we showcase varieties of resilience in Midas. My measures of well-being are not the only protective resources covered in that publication. There are other things covered as well. But it's an interesting publication where we look at well-being vis-a-vis a multitude of life challenges as they're being played out longitudinally over time in the Midas investigation. This is not from Midas, but it's an important evidence of aging as a moderating variable. So for those of us who study aging, we know that with aging, the likelihood of sleep disruption increases. So that's a kind of almost normative challenge people experience as they age. But this publication, which was based on a small longitudinal sample we had in Wisconsin, actually showed that older women who have higher levels of well-being have reduced risk of disrupted sleep. And I think that probably makes a lot of sense. If you're purposefully engaged, I mean, if you're really like up and busy and doing things every day, you're probably not napping as much during the day, and therefore you're more likely to have a good night's sleep. With Jen Morozek, now Jen Boylan, she generated this really wonderful publication as a graduate student, showing a link between educational status, studying inequalities in health is a very big theme in Midas. And this was a publication showing that if you have lower levels of educational attainment, you have higher levels of interleukin-6, but the effect is buffered by well-being. And so the bar graph here basically shows higher levels of this inflammatory marker with lower levels of educational attainment, and then it shows in the white box what is interleukin-6 all about. It's a marker of inflammation that's involved in the etiology of numerous diseases listed here. But the important thing is that this educational gradient in interleukin-6 is moderated by well-being. And these are the graphs in the published paper basically showing this moderation effect across different measures of well-being. With Elliot Friedman, this is one of a number of contributions Elliot has made in the area of studying another reality of aging, and that is if you live long enough, you're going to have multiple co-occurring chronic conditions. And those chronic conditions are not only the product of inflammatory processes over the course of life, they also fuel further inflammatory processes. So there's this kind of two-way directionality operating between inflammatory processes and chronic conditions, but the important part of this article was to basically underscore that higher psychological well-being protects against the fueling of inflammatory processes in the face of co-occurring chronic conditions in later life. And then I want to highlight just a few of the findings about eudaimonia and the brain, and starting with, these are both publications, recent publications from the Midas data set. So Stacy Schaefer, working with a large group under Richie Davidson's supervision, basically used the Midas sample to show that higher purpose in life predicts better emotion regulation, smaller eye blink reflex after negative provocation. Another imaging study from Midas, in which Aaron Heller is the first author, basically showed linkages between reward circuitry in the brain, eudaimonic well-being, and cortisol measured over the course of the day. First key finding, and this is not purpose in life, this is the composite eudaimonic well-being overall, which is what's on the vertical axis here. What you see is that those who showed sustained engagement of the ventral striatum in response to positive stimuli had higher levels of reported well-being. And these findings then connected this sustained engagement of reward circuitry in the brain to reduced cortisol output over the day, measured both in terms of area under the curve and in terms of the diurnal patterns across the course of the day. Okay, so this brings me to say a few things about promoting well-being among those who most need it. This was work that was initiated by Giovanni Fava years ago when he and I met at a meeting, psychosomatic meeting in Europe in the mid-90s. He went on to develop well-being therapy, which has gotten a lot of attention, and it's important in recovery from depression and anxiety. And this is, I think a really important study because its emphasis is on the sustained effect of well-being therapy, which was part of the cognitive behavior therapy that was being used in these interventions. And this basically shows the remission profiles over a period of 6 years, where you see a much greater proportion of people in the intervention remaining in remission if they participated in the well-being therapy that was part of the cognitive behavioral therapy. Chiara Ruini has taken a lot of leadership moving from treatment to prevention. She's known in this positive psychology group, and she's on the program multiple times here. She's been active teaching well-being therapy to children and adolescents, and some of those publications are noted here. And I would just say that Chiara and I really enjoyed working together recently on a chapter that will soon appear in a handbook on positive clinical psychology, the focus of which was using eudaimonic well-being to improve lives, both in treatment and in educational contexts. And then Elliot Friedman will speak tomorrow at one of the sessions about another intervention we're doing in Wisconsin called Lighten Up. It's a community intervention for older people in the community. Chiara Ruini is a collaborator on this, and it's a kind of adaptation of what she was doing with adolescents in schools. And this program is flourishing in Wisconsin. The initial pilot findings were promising, so we obtained further funds. We're now doing the program in 3 different counties in Wisconsin. Okay, so this is my recap from the past to the present. I think, but of course I'm biased, eudaimonia captures essentials of subjective experience that are attuned to work and family life. I didn't have time to go into many of those findings, but they're in the review article for those of you who care about those connections. We know that eudaimonia varies with aging and with socioeconomic status, especially educational status. We know that it matters for morbidity and mortality. We know that it protects against biological risk factors and is now showing evidence of predicting healthy gene expression related to inflammatory processes. It's involved in adaptive neural mechanisms, and it can be promoted across the life course. Of course, all of these things need to be deepened and extended and expanded, but I would say I'm personally thrilled that this is what has happened over the last 25 years. If I take myself back to sitting in my office, wandering around in the wilderness metaphorically with some eager undergraduates who were just trying to be helpful. Okay, I want to finish with some comments about the future, what's missing, in my view, in my humble opinion. When I spoke at the IPA meetings in Moscow in 2012, this was my title, Contradiction at the Core of the Positive Psychology Movement, the Fundamental Role of the Negative and Adaptive Human Functioning. And I can't underscore the importance of that enough. Eudaimonic well-being, one of the things it's unique for is that it is often achieved via encounters with the negative. That is to say, we need the negative to discover our deeper capacities, purposes, to understand more important meanings in our lives, to actually grow over time. And that is why I think the resilience studies, which are prominent in IPA, I think they're tremendously important because they do bring negative experiences, adversity into the story, as Carmelo Vasquez explained in his presentation as well. But I want to give a shout out here to the work of Corey Keyes in this regard. He got this at the get-go. So that Corey's work has been a series of major contributions integrating in the same sample in population-based studies, integrating mental illness with psychological and social well-being to identify very important subgroups in society that need attention. And he's linking his formulation to health in the same way that many other people in Midas are using the health variables, and it's very important work. But I've put in bright red and black here. I truly think there's some seriously neglected negatives in the research that we're doing. So when we talk about resilience, we're talking about resilience vis-a-vis inequality, resilience vis-a-vis loss of a spouse, loss of a child, loss of a job, difficult life events. Those are not, and then in Corey's work, there's the negative in terms of how do we put well-being together with depression and anxiety and other forms of serious disorders. None of those are getting at what I think are some of the most malevolent forces in contemporary life. And so oh dear, where's my slide from Dante? I think it was lost. Oh, bummer. It's my favorite slide. We were messing with the slides a little bit in the background, but okay, so before looking at this slide, there was supposed to be a slide with a wonderful visualization of Dante's 9 circles of hell. And I think everybody needs to read Dante. I learned from Chiara Ruini that, if you grew up in Italy, you hate Dante because you have to read it when you're in high school. But I think Dante is full of wisdom about some of the most pernicious negatives of our time. They are not depression and anxiety. They are greed, gluttony, self-interest, corruption. Those are the things that are in the 9 circles of hell for Dante. And I actually think it's tremendously important in contemporary times, especially for those who are interested in studying things that are meant to improve the human condition, that we mobilize our capacities, not only to promote growth and wellness and happiness, but that we really shine a spotlight on these malevolent forces in contemporary life that are undermining the eudaimonia of many people. I had on my slide Thomas Piketty's book published in 2014, which got a lot of attention in the New York Times and elsewhere. He's a French economist. The book is entitled Capitalism in the 21st Century, and it's really about the grotesque inequality in our era, which is expanding. We have in the United States surpassed the Gilded Age in the level of inequality in contemporary society. So, we're in an era that's even worse than what Edith Wharton and Henry James wrote about in showcasing the lives of these incredibly privileged people. And I've spent a couple decades studying inequalities in health, and I have come away with it realizing that we're studying inequalities in health in a very antiseptic way. That is, we say, well, if your income is here or your educational level is here, what does that mean for your health outcomes, and what are the pathways and mechanisms? Nobody ever shines a spotlight on why are there so many people who are at such lower levels in the hierarchy? And it's because of individuals at the top, people in positions of power who are self-interested, greedy, and corrupt. And I think these things have to be something we pay attention to. So let me not end on such a sour note. I also think that we need more humanists at the table in reaching to improve the human condition. This is from, it's an image from a meeting I attended at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and the title is really informative: A Meaningful Life in a Just Society. So positive psychology needs to embrace just societies. We need to be thinking about, and I know that there are interests in looking at organizations and societies, but what I'm wanting to draw attention to is the need to look at individuals within societies and within organizations who are, I think, showing some of those negatives I referred to previously. And because they are in positions of power, it is having an impact in undermining the well-being of others. Humanists, and I'm talking in particular philosophical humanists, help us bring that into focus because of their deep and thoughtful approaches to values, ethics, and morality. Okay, but other relevant happenings, and I'm going to end on these, have to do with, this is on my theme of bringing the humanities into this world. I want to draw attention to this report in 2013 from the Royal Society for Public Health in the UK entitled Art, Health and Well-Being. And it's about many interventions being done in the UK, including museum experiences. And I'm now collaborating with various people involved in curation of museums with a focus on actually measuring the impacts for well-being. So this field of health humanities is taking off. I wanted to underscore another, I think, really valuable kind of popular but very erudite book by Martha Nussbaum, Not-for-Profit, Why Democracies Need the Humanities. And here she talks about the essential role of the arts in cultivating competent and compassionate citizens. Which brings me back to Midas. These are my last points. For the younger people out there, on your journey becoming the person that you're going to be as a psychologist, a practitioner, believe in yourself, follow your dream, follow your nose, whatever, and be self-critical. And this is where I say to myself, well, what is Midas not doing? Midas is doing a lot. Midas is, and we try to showcase it with this integrative emphasis here, but I'm actually aware of all the things that Midas is not doing. We are not getting any kind of handle whatsoever on people's encounters with the arts, the visual arts in museums and galleries, on the streets, music, literature, poetry, dance, film, theater, encounters with nature. Those things undoubtedly enrich both hedonic and eudaimonic well-being, and I think they can be particularly important in nourishing eudaimonic well-being during periods of trauma and adversity. So I think that's my finale. I'll end with this lovely quote by Rilke: "The purpose of life is to be defeated by greater and greater things." And then here are a few words from Henry James. Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions, if there are any. Yes.
I'd like to ask you if you can expand a little bit. What do you think could be done with children and adolescents to help them to scaffold their eudaimonic well-being, or basically purpose in life?
I think that's a question for Chiara Ruini, who's actually, she will be giving a presentation, is it tomorrow, Chiara, about doing some of this work with children. She uses a lot of innovative techniques, and I'll let her talk about that, but I was convinced years ago by actually reading some work from Steve Danish that, children early on in life become goal setters. They have aspirations for themselves and their lives. And so I think there's a lot of potential to work with there. But really important things have to do with teaching persistence in pursuit of one's goals and objectives, and probably engaging in some of this, kind of realistic self-evaluation that is part of self-acceptance. I'm sorry, I don't think I'm really the best person to answer that question. I don't do anything with children except have them. I have two wonderful children, and I think they're flourishing. Yeah.
Dr. Ryff?
Yeah.
First of all, it's just incredible you're here, so thank you so much for coming. Can you share more about some of the research being done with regards to well-being and how it affects inflammation in the body?
So what do you mean? Do you want more examples of that, or?
Yes.
Elliot, there are a number of publications on the Midas website that use the inflammatory markers. We have a different mix of them. They get linked with different psychosocial, experiential variables. I'm not really, apart from just encouraging you to go to the Midas website and look at those, they are expansions of the kinds of examples that I gave in the talk here. And we are continuing to actually broaden our assessment of cytokines and deepen our battery of measures of those biological processes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
I wonder if you think our greed, gluttony, and self-interest, the Dante things, are causing our depression and anxiety.
I think those are really, really great questions, and why isn't anybody asking them? Or maybe somebody is, and I don't know about it. Yeah, but I mean, we spend so much time studying as individual level experiences, depression and anxiety, and now well-being and many positive things thanks to the positive psychology movement. But what I don't get is why we don't have better conceptual and empirical handles on who becomes corrupt, who becomes greedy, who is full of vanity and self-promotion. They're, I think, really malevolent forces, and we see them. We see them everywhere in our lives, and I don't know if there's a science out there that's about that. I would like to more about it, but yeah, it could be that I think probably most of us who endorse Aristotle's ethic about achieving the best that is within us, that is not about self-interest and greed and corruption and gluttony and self-promotion. And so it would make some sense to me to think that people who are on that path are probably not flourishing in some deeper way. But what I don't understand is why we aren't actually doing a better job of kind of shining a spotlight on those. I mean, the reason we have such massive inequality today is because people at the top are okay with it. That's really what it's about. Yeah, I guess maybe one more question. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the question is there, what's the overlap between purpose in life and existential meaning? Those are actually big, complex questions, and I think there certainly is overlap. For me, purpose in life has a kind of forward-moving component, which has to do with goal setting and goal direction, but purpose and is also, I think, very much a part of interpreting, making sense of, finding meaning in one's experience. And so undoubtedly there's room for kind of greater precision there, even in my own measures and thinking, but I think they kind of go together. And Viktor Frankl embodied that, because his ability to actually make meaning in the camps involved goals about envisioning himself in the future, which he did, which was incredible. He had like imagery of, surviving that experience, and because he was a psychiatrist, of actually, giving talks about it, using it. So that was about meaning making that was at the same time taking him to a place where he could actually transform the trauma into something that had deep value, and then he could actually envision himself carrying that forward and using it for other people, and that was the essence of developing logotherapy. And I'm not a clinician. I've never understood why, logotherapy hasn't had greater impact. It's certainly works for me. Thank you.